This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is brought to you by Gates of Stone, an Asian-inspired epic fantasy novel by Angus MacAllan. Taylor Anderson, New York Times bestselling author of the Destroyer Men series, writes, "I meant to give Gates of Stone a quick look before I started reading it and couldn't put it down. Angus MacAllan is a brilliant storyteller. Learn more over at gatesofstonebook.com.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 343 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing Series 11 of Doctor Who, which is the first season to star Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor. And this will involve spoilers for every episode of the season, and for the New Year's Day special, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Raj Don Khanna, making his 12th appearance on the show. He's the author of the post-apocalyptic novels Falling Sky, Rising Tide, and Raining Fire, and his short fiction appears in magazines such as Lightspeed, Shimmer, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. His articles have appeared on Tor.com and LitReactor.com. So Raj, welcome to the show.
Thanks, glad to be back.
Then next up, we've got Sara Lynn Michener, making her 9th appearance on the show. She's a Ravenclaw tricky maker feminist who writes at Medium and lives in Northern California with a Renaissance engineer, a dog, and a bird. So Sara, welcome to the show.
I always enjoy it.
And also joining us today is Matthew Kressel, making his 6th appearance on the show. He's the author of the novel King of Shards. And his short story The Last Novelist, or A Dead Lizard in the Yard, was nominated for the Nebula Award and was a finalist for the Eugene Foster Memorial Award. Together with Ellen Datlow, he hosts the monthly fantastic fiction reading series at the KGB Bar in New York. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, great to be back.
And today's show is brought to you by the new novel Gates of Stone by Angus MacAllan. And here's a description of the book. It says, "In a world of blood and magic, a powerful epic fantasy begins. An emperor's daughter who will not be denied. Just before her 16th birthday, Princess Katerina is refused her rightful place as heir to the Empire of the Ice Bear solely because of her sex. Determined to regain her inheritance, she murders the foreign lord she's been ordered to marry and embarks on a perilous voyage to the lush tropical islands of the Laut Basar in search of the vast wealth and power she needs to claim the empire for herself. A prince forced to take a stand. On a small island kingdom, Prince Arjun's idyllic life is shattered when a malignant sorcerer invades, slaughters his people, and steals the sacred sword of Jun's ancestors. With his royal father dead and his palace in ruins, Jun reluctantly tracks the sorcerer and the magical blade far across the pirate-infested waters of the Laut Basar. A sorcerer seeking to destroy the world. Long ago, the powerful relics known as the Seven Keys were used to safely lock away the terrifying evils of the Seven Hells. With Jun's ancient sword in his grasp, the sorcerer Manku has claimed the first key and begun his mission to unleash catastrophe upon the land. As the destiny of these three entwine in the lawless islands of the Laut Basar, the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. For if the sorcerer cannot be stopped, the world itself will be unmade." Peter McLean, author of Priest of Bones, writes, "With tense political drama and rip-roaring action in a fresh and believable Asian-inspired setting, Gates of Stone reads like a collaboration between Joe Abercrombie and James Clavell. Add ancient feuding sorcerers and a queen who would eat Cersei Lannister for breakfast, and you have the makings of an excellent fantasy debut. Angus MacAllan is a compelling new voice in epic fantasy." And here's a bit about the author. It says, Angus MacAllan is a pseudonym for Angus Donald, a British fiction writer and former journalist who is now based just outside London. He was born in China and lived, worked, and studied in Asia for much of his early adult life. He was awarded a master's degree with honors in social anthropology by the University of Edinburgh, partly based on his field's work in Indonesia, which led to a dissertation, Magic, Sorcery, and Society. He also worked as a journalist in Hong Kong, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So again, the book is called Gates of Stone by Angus MacAllan, and you can learn more over at gatesofstonebook.com. All right, so now let's get to our panel. Okay, so let's start off with Raj and have you just tell us about your background as a Doctor Who fan.
Yeah, so I think I first encountered Doctor Who when I was a kid, when it was on PBS, where I grew up in Jersey. And when I first discovered it, I should say, Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, was in those episodes, and they would show them back to back, and I was just kind of instantly captivated by this weird English show with bad special effects. But I think, I remember seeing my first Dalek and just being kind of immediately taken with that image and the strange name and the whole ridiculousness of it all. And then I lost touch with Doctor Who for years. I mean, I think I watched maybe a couple of the Peter Davison episodes, but when it came back in 2005 with the Ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, I started watching again all the way through. So I've been pretty constant with it until now.
See, now I grew up just across the river in Westchester, New York, and I never saw Doctor Who on television on PBS or anything. Do you know if it was on there as well, or did I was just not staying up late enough or something?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was in odd times. And so, I mean, I know for sure there are some nights on the weekends that I stayed up late, like, 10 o'clock and later to watch them. And I think I would always fall asleep, in the midst of a series of episodes. But I assume they would be played here too. It's just, I think you either had to happen upon it or know that it was out there, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about Sarah? What was your background with Doctor Who?
I had seen the original series when I was a homeschooled teenager, and back when I would spend hours and hours watching black and white films and TV shows and stuff like that on various cable channels. There was not much social time when I was homeschooled, so I had hours to do this. But then our mutual friend Carolyn had introduced me to the 9th and 10th Doctors. So I sort of picked it up from there and been on and off ever since.
And so your parents let you watch Doctor Who?
They, their usual thing with media was weird in that they let us watch almost anything. They were very conservative otherwise. But I remember them taking me to see, like, Presumed Innocent when that came out, and I was like 10 or 11. And I was born in 79, so whenever that was made. But, like, there were a lot of sort of very inappropriate things that they had me watch anyway, because I don't think they wanted to hire a babysitter for just one kid. So I remember, being taken to all these things. But they just did not express interest. They thought, well, if it's on TV, it should be fine for her.
Especially if it's on, like, Turner Classic Movies or something.
Right.
Little did they know how subversive.
Little did they know.
Well, so how about Matt? What's your background as a Doctor Who fan?
I think my background mirrors Rajan's pretty much. I remember watching the my introduction to the Doctor was the fourth Doctor, Tom Baker. I think it was usually after school. I seem to remember watching it around like 3 or 4:30. Sometimes in the fall and winter as the sun was going down. It was dark out, and they always kind of creeped me out a little bit because I think some of the monsters were a little scary for me at that age. So I definitely watched the fourth Doctor, the fifth Doctor, Peter Davison, and sixth, Colin Baker. Not as much, and then didn't really watch much Doctor Who again until Christopher Eccleston in 2005, and then since then I've been watching pretty religiously.
Now I forget, did you grow up on Long Island?
Yeah, I grew up on Long Island, and I seem to remember, my memory could be off at this point, and I'm sure it probably is, but I seem to remember it being on like Channel 13 or Channel 21. And it was like they would play the Doctor Who episodes. Like a lot of times they would do it non-sequentially, or if they were sequential, somehow I would miss them. So even though there was like 3 and 4 parters, I would only catch like 1 or 2 and would never find out how it ends. Or I would see the final episode and want to catch the first 3. And somehow I never, like some of those original Tom Baker series, like I never saw the complete. All the parts of the series until much later.
Because I mean, as you guys know, watching this series 11, this was the first Doctor Who I ever really watched. I don't remember it ever being on when I was a kid. I was sort of aware that it existed. My aunt and uncle had a Doctor Who poster up in their kitchen of their house, but and I guess like I probably could have gone out and sought out the VHS tapes or something, but I never really knew anyone who was into it, so. I never really watched it as a kid, and then by the time they relaunched the show in 2005 with Christopher Eccleston, by that point I was in grad school and I was like 100% focused on writing and was not watching really any TV at all. And I always kind of had the sense with Doctor Who that it wasn't something that I would love, because I tend to like stuff that's really dark and serious, or I also like stuff that's laugh out loud funny. And my completely uninformed opinion or impression was that it would sort of fall somewhere in between, that it would be kind of funny and kind of not serious, and it would sort of be in a sort of uncomfortable middle ground for me as far as those things went. But so then, once this series came along, and I just saw so many people on YouTube saying like, "Oh, this is the worst Doctor Who ever. They've ruined my childhood." But then at the same time, like, it was like the series is like 94% on Rotten Tomatoes or something. And so it just made me curious. I'm like, I'm going to sit down. I'm just curious to see like how good I think it is personally. So that's kind of how this came about. But so, and I'll give you my thoughts in a second, but so how about let's go back to Raj. So what were your, sort of, expectations going into this series 11? Kind of what were you hoping or fearing?
I don't know that I had a lot of fear. I mean, I was one of those people who was excited when they said the Doctor was going to be a woman, because it had come up before that the Doctor should be a woman, or the Doctor should be black, or the Doctor should be whatever. And I remember there being this huge, or at least the impression of there being a huge outcry from people that, like, it wouldn't be the same and it would ruin the whole thing. The Doctor's supposed to be a man. And even I think Stephen Moffat said that he believed that the Doctor should be a man as well. And that never made sense to me. I mean, this is a alien who makes a habit out of creating new bodies for themselves whenever, they take too much damage or, get too old or whatever it is. So why couldn't they be, a man or a woman? So when they actually announced that, I was just really happy. And I knew Jodie Whittaker from Broadchurch, and I liked her in that. And so I thought she could probably do a decent job. And I guess she was in also Attack the Block too, right? So, I felt like they cast somebody who was capable of doing good work, but I wasn't sure what to expect from the new showrunner and things like that. I think I have a weird relationship with Doctor Who in that I love it. I love the Doctor. I love the idea of the show, but the execution of the show doesn't always work for me. And with the previous showrunners, I think they've had really good aspects of the show, and then kind of things that bugged me ongoing. So I think I was more concerned with, is the showrunner going to take the show in a direction that I like? And I don't mean direction as in like politically, what people are saying, oh, it's too politically correct or whatever. I mean more like, are the plots going to be decent? Is the science going to be something that they, spend any time on and things like that? So that was really what I was concerned the most with, I guess.
Right. Let me just say for non-Whovians like myself, when you say Stephen Moffat says X, Stephen Moffat being the showrunner for the last couple seasons. The
previous showrunner, right. So there's been now, I guess, 3 showrunners, unless I'm forgetting somebody. There was, Russell Davies was the first one, then Stephen Moffat, and now Chris Chibnall.
This is since it came back in 2005.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so Chris Chibnall was the new showrunner. He just started this season. I think he had written some episodes of Doctor Who in the past, and I think he was the showrunner for Torchwood, which was a spin-off series from Doctor Who. It's kind of funny because he was like a member of some sort of Doctor Who fan club, and you can watch this video from 1989 or something where he's talking about how the show has just gone off on a total. He's like, I don't even know, 18 or something in this video. He's on a TV show and talking about how the show has just totally gone off the rails and it's gone in a completely wrong direction. So it's kind of funny because now this is like, like the tables have turned on him. But so Sarah, what were your kind of expectations or hopes going into the season?
I was very intrigued when I heard that it was going to be a female Doctor, and I also felt like it was long overdue. And honestly, I mean, as a feminist sci-fi fan, it's one of the things that always bothered me about Doctor Who. I felt like the sort of formula of always having female companions, always having male doctors, like, it just made me think of Doctor Who in a certain way that wasn't very flattering towards it. And to me, it limited the scope of, it felt almost less real, because if as he was saying, if this alien does in fact have this ability to regenerate in all of these bodies and something, why are we still seeing this very standard, sort of very heteronormative pairing constantly? Even though the Doctor, I do appreciate that the Doctor has always been somewhat asexual. Like, I feel like, especially because, he always had, female companions, especially much younger female companions, it would have been
because he's like 3,000 years old. So
right,
we're talking
exactly.
much younger. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I was very excited about it, and more excited about this season of Doctor Who than I have about any of the other new Doctors.
Mm-hmm. How about Matt? Expectations?
I was super excited. I watched Broadchurch. I didn't see Attack the Block, but I thought Jodie Whittaker was great in Broadchurch, and I just thought, like, when they revealed those first pictures of her, in her new, get up, I was like, oh, I'm sold already. And, like, I have a love-hate relationship with Moffat. I think some of his depictions of women in the series have been problematic in the past, but he had some amazing episodes on the other hand, like Blink, The Girl in the Fireplace, The Doctor Dances, The Silence in the Library. Like, those are all fantastic episodes. And, when I speak to people who've never seen Doctor Who, I say, let's watch Blink. I say, even though the Doctor really is kind of a secondary character in that episode, it's such a good science fiction. One of the problems I always have with Doctor Who, and by the way, I love Doctor Who, is that you're in a time machine, but a lot of times, like, they don't use that as a device in the plot. Obviously, it would create all sorts of problems if they did it in every single episode, but it's a lot of times it's like, okay, we have this time machine, we can, basically manipulate history, but let's just play everything linearly. But Blink does that in a completely different way. It's like, we're just gonna take the notion of time travel to this completely amazing level. If you haven't seen it, go watch it now. I love it. But Moffat, I feel like with the last few seasons of Doctor Who, he was always going for this kind of like bombastic epicness that I felt was doing a disservice to the show itself. It just sort of, I guess it kind of sort of diluted everything for me, and I was less excited. Like, the first season of Peter Capaldi, I was lukewarm about. The second season I liked better, but I was really just happy that we were going to have a new showrunner, that we were going to take it in, someone's going to, new doctor, a doctor as a woman, a new head showrunner. I was like, I'm just all in. Like, I had no reservations about this and no fears.
I will say I have seen Blink because I interviewed James Glick he wrote a book about time travel. And so in preparation for that, I think that's the only Doctor Who episode that I've actually sat down and watched from beginning to end.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was great. Yeah. It's totally brilliant. The premise is that there's these sort of aliens or monsters or something who they are frozen by beings looked at. And so, they sort of sneak up on you when you're not looking at them or when you're blinking. But like you said, the Doctor's almost not in that at all. I think he's in a videotape and then he shows up at the end. So I really still, from watching that, didn't have any like huge impression of what the Doctor was like as a character. I mean, just from cultural osmosis, I feel like I know the basics of this show, that there's the Doctor, and he's this alien from the planet Gallifrey, and he has a sonic screwdriver and a time-space machine called a TARDIS, which looks like a British phone box, whatever. I know he has a robot dog.
Police box.
Police box?
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Is it not like a phone booth kind of thing?
The phone booths are the red ones.
Right.
So what's the? I don't you see. This is how uninformed I am. So what is the actual thing in real life? Like, what would you use it for?
I don't think they use them anymore. I think they're long out of use, but they're old police boxes. I think they have like an emergency phone in them, and I don't actually know what the police would do inside of it, but I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay, but it sounds like it is kind of like a phone booth. It's like a police phone booth.
Yeah, it's like it's a phone booth that goes directly to the police.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really knew about Doctor Who before I watched this show. I mean, I knew he always had a female companion.
Not always.
No.
Or I knew he often had a female companion. Like,
yeah.
I think that's pretty much about it. So I was going into this pretty fresh. Oh, I knew about the Daleks, or Daleks. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Maybe I'll give you my impressions of this first episode going into it. I did not understand why she fell out of the sky. I I felt that was a little underexplained. But and I'd heard so much about Jodie Whittaker's casting being controversial, so I was kind of curious to see what she was like, and I thought she was like absolutely fantastic. I thought she was the highlight of this show. So I don't know what any of the other actors really were like, but just like coming into the show as a newcomer, I thought she was fantastic. And actually, I really liked all the four main characters. I thought were all great. You have, in addition to the Doctor, you have this old guy named Graham and his grandson Ryan, and Ryan's old friend from school, Yaz, who's a police officer in training.
Well, it's his step-grandson, which I think is an important plot point.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Noted. That's a good point. Step-grandson.
Because they're kind of estranged. Like, they don't really get along very well at first.
Right. So Graham had married Ryan's grandmother, and Ryan's father was kind of out of the picture and has never had a father figure and is really reluctant to take to Graham as a paternal figure. But so Raj, what did you think of these four main characters and sort of the dynamics between them?
Well, I agree with you that I loved Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor from the beginning. Just the energy that she had. I love the hopefulness in the character that to me feels refreshing after having a lot of cranky white dudes. And the humor, which I think is really important, that, and it's a kind of like, she pops in these little lines here and there that just make me laugh. They're really kind of light and fresh and smart, I think, kind of the observation she makes or the references she makes. I think that the group is great. Like, I feel like, people will criticize probably the inclusion of all these characters as, ticking boxes perhaps, but I love that the show has not for every single person in the world, but the show has people that represent a large swath of the audience who's watching it. And I think that the personal dynamics between the characters was a really smart idea, because you don't even need to have the Doctor on screen to have there be, tension and interesting conversations. And, a lot of the arcs that happen over the course of this season have to do with their interpersonal relationships and nothing to do with the Doctor whatsoever.
Yeah.
So have the main characters not been ethnically diverse in the past? Is this a new thing?
I wouldn't say it's I guess who was the second companion that Tennant had? I'm forgetting her name now.
Yeah. She's the one that fell in love with him.
Yeah, so they had a black woman as companion. Martha, yeah. And then, they had a man before with, I guess, Rory for the relaunched show. And they had Bill, right? So they've had ethnically diverse, but they tend to be young, attractive people who are hanging out with the Doctor up until now, I suppose. Not that the people that are on there are not attractive, but for example, having an older guy, I thought was a great, addition to the mix, especially since the Doctor's appearance now is a lot younger, so it also provides a contrast. And I don't know, it's usually one or two companions, so having three again, I think, just beefs up that whole group of people to play with and play against. I think it was a challenge possibly over the course of the season to be able to cover all of them adequately, but I think, from my opinion, they did a fine job by the end of the season. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard some criticism that people thought that the relationship between Ryan and Graham was really well developed and that Yaz was sort of underdeveloped a little bit.
I definitely want to see more of her in the next season. I think that she is, one of the things I liked about this series is that they did really work more on character development, I think, than many of the other Doctor Who series that I have seen.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, exploring their backstories and everything. And the one really Yaz backstory we had was more about her grandmother. And it was still, sort of a Yaz story. But, it wasn't so much about her. So I do feel like, we need to see more of Yaz, whereas we, have the other characters are explored a little bit more. But I think they'll take care of that in the next season.
Yeah, like, one of the issues that I had with Yaz was that she is a police officer, right? So her natural instinct would be to be a kind of detective. At least that's the way I would probably write her. And we don't really see her doing much detecting. I think it would be interesting to sort of have that play off the Doctor, because to me the Doctor is sort of like a Sherlock Holmes in space, right? So the Doctor is, always solving problems, usually with some form of engineering or science or, something that she or he remembers. So it's like, I just thought it would be interesting to have Yaz sort of, take up that role and maybe see the Doctor as a kind of mentor for who she is. And, there was so much, like Yaz to me is still kind of a cipher, I think. So like the show spent so much time with the relationship between Graham and Ryan, and Yaz sort of felt at sometimes superfluous. So, there were times when I was like, I wonder if three companions is too many for this show. I don't think it is. I think it actually works really well, but, like Sara said, I want to see like Yaz's character explored more in next season.
I agree, Matt, that if you didn't watch the first episode where you found out she was a police officer in training, I don't know that there's really anything else in the series that would give you that impression.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see her like, detect or say, oh, this is the procedure that we did, because Ryan in that what was it, Kerblam, the sort of the Amazon analog episode, he talks about his role as being, working in a what was he, in some kind of factory, right? Like he was a factory worker or something?
Oh, I thought he was like handling packages.
Packages or something, yeah. So it's like, at least they reference that. And then, Graham has, of course, the Rosa Parks episode where he's talking about the bus driver and he goes to the bus station and talks to the bus guy. So I just wanted to see Yaz, be like, okay, as a cop, as a police officer, this is what I would do and this is how I would handle this. And
They do reference it a couple times, just for example, in the episode which was called It Takes You Away, when they're talking to that girl in Norway. She does talk to Ryan about how she's had training in talking to kids and she's learned how to
that's
how
right.
to talk to them.
Right. Yes, right.
And then in the New Year's episode, I agree. It needs to be developed more. I'd like to see more of it, and she should have more to do. She should have more of a backstory and an arc. But there was a point at which she's like, I took down their information. I have their, their cell phones or whatever. And that moment for me, I was like, oh, right. Cause she knows how to do that. Like that's what she would do as a cop.
Yes,
and
right.
I like that little touch. So.
Yeah. Cause she did do that and I didn't connect in my head that she was doing that because that she's trained that way. Yeah. Cause I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, that was very clever and forward thinking of her. And then, oh no, of course that makes sense. Yes.
Well, I also thought, speaking of the characters' backstories, there was not a lot about the Doctor's backstory, which maybe for regular fans is kind of like, all that stuff already. But it did strike me as a little odd that these humans are never like, so you're an alien? Like, where did this TARDIS come from? What's it like being in your bodies?
Well, it's meant to be very mysterious. Like, that's part of the humor of the character, right? It's kind of like when she, when he's like, you're not Banksy, and she's like, or am I? And that's who the Doctor is, and where he or she came from has always been sort of, I think, shrouded in mystery on purpose to give it a sense of mystery, of that sort of unknown aspect making it more interesting.
I do agree with that, but I also feel like I wanted the companions to just have a few more conversations with her, just be a little more curious. I mean, they can still be coy, like, the Doctor can still be coy about where she comes from and, what she's done and things like that. But I just felt like the show could have gone a little deeper into her character. They
did mention her grandmother's, which I thought was interesting.
Yes.
I had 6.
Yeah.
Right. It would be less even about revealing that information if it's supposed to be mysterious. It's more just, it would humanize those companions, I think, to have them wondering that kind of stuff that anyone would want to know more about in that situation.
Yeah.
See, like there are things like little things that the show, like little grace notes, like where Graham is like, oh, I pack sandwiches before we go out on these adventures. And then I'm like, oh, wait, did he do that like, back at home, like they went back to his home and he made sandwiches, or is there like a kitchen on the TARDIS? And are they like hanging out and like, having like water cooler chat? Because like that would be a really cool episode just to see like what happens on the TARDIS. And I think there were a few episodes of like earlier seasons where we see, like whole episodes on the TARDIS, and I always find those interesting because it shows part of the show that you never see. So like I think maybe we're supposed to think that stuff is happening in the background, but yeah, I agree. Yeah. It could be brought forward.
I would just like to say though that having watched the previous four Doctors, and usually with the sole companion they were with, there was a lot of attention put on the Doctors, who is the Doctor, what is in his past, and the companions were always so obsessed with the Doctor, or getting close to the Doctor. And so I actually find it refreshing that the focus is not really on what the Doctor is about. It's more on the companions that I think, I think I just got really tired of like everyone worshiping the Doctor everywhere they went. And the fact that the Doctor is now kind of just the leader of this little gang, to me, is awesome. I love that so much.
Yeah.
All right, well, I wanted to mention this, speaking of Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor. And did you guys see this thing that Neil Gaiman tweeted? He said, after the first episode premiered, he says, "I just watched The Woman Who Fell to Earth. That was definitely the Doctor. Not that I had any real doubts, but it's wonderful to see how much of the Doctor she is." And then some internet rando replies, "So you're a new fan because the Doctor is a woman, not a real fan of the show since the 60s then."
Oh my God.
And
imagine saying that to him. Oh my God.
to which Neil Gaiman replies, "My first episodes of Doctor Who were the first William Hartnell Dalek story. You can read about it in my introduction to the first Doctor Who novelization."
Right.
Yeah, and not to mention how many episodes did he write? 2 or 3 episodes on the show as well. Yeah.
Oh God.
But yeah, so I want to mention that. But so I guess like my impressions as a new viewer were like, maybe you guys can tell. I mean, this is just the tone of the show, right? Or the sort of, lighthearted comedic tone of the show or something. But it seems to me that the Doctor is this really nice person who cares a lot about the companions, but then she puts them in incredible danger all the time without any like real plan or like adequate equipment or training or anything like that. Is this something that you just kind of have to go with, or is that addressed, do you think?
Yeah, I've always thought it's kind of a Dumbledore problem. Like, this is one of the main complaints that people have about the Dumbledore character. Like, why, if he cares so much about Harry, did he put them in these incredibly dangerous situations? But I think that it is something that has been consistent throughout the series of Doctor Who that I've watched. But I feel like it's because, the characters always are warned on some level. Like, you might not live, just to let you know. But I think that the Doctor has seen enough and has seen so much more than us that I think that he or she knows that even if the character, if one of the companions is lost, they're probably going to see so much more, infinitely more than the average human, and that it will have been worth it. But I think that again, it's a personal choice of the companion.
Yeah, I mean, she warns them at one point. She's like, "You could die. It's dangerous out there. You could die." But I think, like you said, I think she understands that it's such, the universe is so big and this, so many wondrous, unknown things out there to see. Like, she's thousands of years old and still she hasn't seen everything. And so it's like, she's got this insatiable curiosity, which I love. And she's like, "I'm curious and I don't want to experience this alone. I want to experience this with someone. It's dangerous. We can get hurt. We could die. But, if you want to come along with me, I'd love to have you." And I think that's, the heart of the show is that curiosity. Yes, they go into dangerous situations, and almost always the companions, like I think it was, which Doctor was it? It was like, it was all like after the Christopher Eccleston, like all of them, it was like the Doctor would always say to the companion, like, "Stay here." And then, of course, the companion wouldn't. I think, like, Rose was famous for this. Rose is like, no, I'm going to go explore the ship and, I'm going to go see what the 28th century is like. I'm not going to sit in the TARDIS and, I'm going to walk around and see it. And I think that's what's driving these companions. It's just pure curiosity. And of course, they get into trouble.
I also think one of the things we've seen before is that the Doctor, generally thinks, I think most of the time, that they can get the companion out of whatever trouble, because they're so smart or whatever. And usually they do up until the point where they don't, and when that happens, it's like that moment of pathos or whatever. But yeah, otherwise I think I agree with everything that everyone else said.
Well, but like in the last episode or in the finale, the Doctor's like, here's these throat mics, like walkie-talkies basically. These allow us to keep in touch with each other. And I'm kind of like, wait, have they not had anything like that this whole time to just be able to communicate with each other? Like, I guess not.
I think it's a mistake with Doctor Who to kind of, like, if you analyze the show too carefully, a lot of it falls apart because, like, stuff that they're introducing in earlier seasons, earlier Doctors, they could just, if they had used that, then they could solve this whole problem, but they don't. So it's like, I tend to overlook those things, but yeah, like there are little flaws like that. Like, why couldn't they have little radio communicators? Although I do think that, it was Christopher Eccleston who introduced the idea that, the Doctor could reprogram your cell phone, and then not only could you call the Doctor wherever you are, but you could call through time. I think there was the episode where Rose called like 5 billion years into the past to her mom and left a message on the answering machine. Like, I was like, I love that, well, how come they don't have that all the time in every episode? Well, cause, it would probably break the stories if they had that. So there's a lot of hand waving going on is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, speaking of that, I mean, there was this funny thing where she had given a cell phone to Elvis, I think, who had passed it on to Frank Sinatra. Like,
right,
that was funny.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, just it was bugging me that nobody had any weapons. I mean, I guess that's a thing that the Doctor is known for. But even if she's against lethal weapons, I wonder why don't they have any sort of 28th century non-lethal weapons?
Well, she has her little sonic screwdriver, which is, sort of it does it all, like, one tool wonder.
It seems to not be a particularly effective weapon, though.
Sometimes it is.
But she uses it to, like, turn off the weapons of other creatures and stuff like that. Like, I think it's a pretty big deal that the Doctor has drawn this very hard line of, no weapons, no guns.
And I think that's what makes the character unique, is that the character, in whatever incarnation, I'm sure there's contradictions to this out there, but generally doesn't try to approach situations with violence. It's usually reason and sometimes diplomacy or, negotiation or whatever. And I think violence is always like the last resort if possible, at all, which is kind of interesting when they introduced the concept of the War Doctor and all that kind of stuff, which we don't have to get into now. But yeah, I mean, I love the fact that the Doctor tries to come up with other solutions. And to me, the idea of using weapons would be like the easy way out for somebody like that. I get your question, but I think it's also a long time facet of that character that violence is kind of like the wrong way, the easy way.
All right. So, what do you guys think of, or what did you think? What were some of your favorite episodes? How about let's go there. So, Sarah, what were some of your favorite episodes of this season?
Oh God, I have to think of the name of the episode. What's the one with the
Saranga Conundrum?
Saranga Conundrum, yeah.
It's funny because I feel like that actually got some criticism for being the weakest one, but for me it was the most fun. Like, I love the little creature. It seemed very Doctor Who to have like an adorable, deadly creature. Because you see a lot of like tropish characters, monster types in a lot of other similar science fiction, where you see like, terrifying creatures are also really ugly. These kinds of pairings. Or you have characters who are good aliens who are, sort of have this otherworldly, beautiful quality, like this Galadriel quality. And I really appreciate that Doctor Who, especially, is good at mixing those elements up and making them surprising. And I really loved the little creature. And I loved the side plot of the pregnant man.
Love that
which was
too.
just funny, and it was it was hysterical. And it was hysterical to watch Graham and Ryan deal with that, with being the guys' doulas. So to me, that was one of the strongest episodes, and I don't really understand why there's some people that are panning it out there as sort of the weakest one. But I thought it was great fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I mean, I liked the pregnant man. I liked that you have to have the two guys to help cut the two umbilical cords. I thought it was kind of clever.
Yeah.
I did think that the episode was a little overstuffed with things. There's the sort of captain and her brother or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like they were sort of underdeveloped, and that part went by awfully quickly. And I felt like they could have almost cut those characters out. I don't know when Matt, what do you think about that?
I agree that subplot felt a little rushed. One of the other things in that episode that I thought was really wonderful and just kind of a symbol for the whole season at large was there was a scene where they're looking at the the ship's star drive, and then she's like, I forgot what century they're in. They're like the 30th century or something, and she's like, this is this century's iPhone. Like this is like the super advanced technology, like miniaturized into this thing. And she's like just looking at it with such awe, like this is what humanity can do when they put their minds to it. And I was like, yes, like that's why I love the show. Like they just stop and point out like really hopeful things, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that to me was, like I got the chills when I watched that. I think people didn't like the creature, I think it was the Pating. They thought it was too cutesy, but I totally love the idea that there's this cute little thing that is totally deadly. I thought that was brilliant. And it actually worked. I thought it was fairly creepy. I would say like I kind of have like 4 favorite episodes of the season. I thought the pilot was a wonderful introduction to the Doctor. I thought overall it really worked for me. I thought the Rosa Parks episode was great with one caveat. I thought that they got rid of the villain too easily, and I didn't quite understand what his motivation was, but I thought the Rosa Parks episode was brilliant. Taronga Conundrum, like we just said. And for me, one of the highlights was, and I think this was also possibly an episode that wasn't rated too highly, but It Takes You Away, where they go across, they go through the mirror into the other reality, and then Graham meets his deceased wife, Grace, I think her name was, and then we find out that this is a universe that a sentient universe created this reality because it wanted to be with other beings, but it couldn't because doing so would destroy both of them. And I was like, wow, that is like such a cosmic, amazing, beautiful science fictional concept. And then I just love the ending where the Doctor is talking to the frog who speaks in Grace's voice, and then they're like, well, why are you in Doctor's like, why are you in a frog's form? And the Solartrack, the alien universe, says, this form pleases me. And I was just like, I just love that. It makes no sense whatsoever, but it's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's just like, wow, it's sense of wonder stuff that when the show hits, it hits wonderfully. And like that to me really worked. And I thought the emotion between, Graham speaking to Grace, his dead wife, deceased wife, and then slowly realizing that she's a simulacrum and not his real wife. And that to me, I thought was like one of the, emotional, like the most powerful emotional, scenes in the whole season. But yeah, I mean, there are other parts of other episodes that I really enjoyed, but I think those 4 are probably my favorite.
Let me just pick up, Matt, on what you were saying about the mirror universe, which I thought, I agree with you. All that stuff was brilliant. I thought that and moving and sort of sense of wonder, as you were saying. I thought that some of the other stuff in that episode that it was connected with was less strong, and maybe that's why people, rate the episode. I thought that the weird, like, gremlin guy, like, I could have done without that. And then just the idea that the dad has, like, boarded up his blind daughter in a house and put speakers making monster noises to keep her scared inside the house. Like, all that stuff was so just, like, weird and not believable that it really, detracted from the episode overall to me. But
yeah. I mean, like, so Ryan, right? He's kind of been abandoned by his dad. And I thought that there was a missed opportunity where he could have this, relationship with the girl who's been abandoned by her dad, because absolutely the dad was totally, like, I thought it was clear to me that he was abandoning his daughter. Like, he was, like, chose his wife, like, what he thought was his wife over his daughter.
No,
like,
but it was just like the way he did it was so weird that
it was weird. And yeah, it was kind of, it was manipulative, but it was a little forced. I agree with that. But I think a lot of times in Doctor Who episodes, it's just sort of, they kind of, like, force a setup in order to get to the actual conflict, and I was willing to overlook that. I didn't actually mind the scenes where they're, like, walking through those creepy tunnels. It like brought me back to the old, like, Tom Baker episodes. It was definitely campy and silly at times, but it still had that classic Doctor Who feel for me, and I enjoyed it. But I can see why other people, didn't work for them as much.
See, how about Raj? What do you think of Matt's list of favorite episodes there? Do you agree with that, or do you disagree?
I mean, I think those are all good episodes. I mean, I think I like the same things that Matt was talking about, and I think that's a good list. The one that nobody mentioned that was one of my favorites, and maybe it's more of a personal thing, but was Demons of the Punjab. And for a multitude of reasons. I mean, I'm of Indian descent, so, like, it had a personal quality. The story of the country splitting is one that, relates directly to my family and my grandparents, and, I've heard about it since I was little. So to kind of see it dramatized was really interesting. And I was, with this and with Rosa Parks, like, those are the episodes, for example, where I was like, oh God, how are they going to handle this? Like, where I thought that they could have had a bad misstep. And yet I thought both of them handled the subject matter really well. I think it helps that, there was a black writer on the Rosa Parks episode, and there was an Indian writer or South Asian writer on the Demons of the Punjab episode as well. So, and I think that that's an important thing that isn't done nearly as often as it should be. But I really liked that one. There was something personal about it, and I actually felt emotion watching the show, which is not always something I feel in Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who, but some of the episodes can be kind of light. And for me, that one, and it was the one episode where they really gave Yaz any kind of, depth as a character. We saw her family. She got to kind of connect with her grandmother. And so that one really stood out to me. And also the fact that, like, you have these aliens that are in it, that you're like, oh God, the aliens, they have to defeat the aliens. What is the aliens' angle? And the aliens are not the problem, that episode. The aliens are just there, as observers. And I liked that little twist, because I think oftentimes, again, in Doctor Who, it can be like, well, this is the bad alien, and the doctor, he or she needs to defeat the alien. And I liked that little sidestep. I thought that the villain of the piece was a little too mustache twirly for that episode, but otherwise I think that one stood out to me. I think possibly because it surprised me by being much better than I was worried about. But I agree that, like, I also really liked It Takes You Away for a lot of the reasons that Matt mentioned, and I also can agree that it has weaknesses, but there's something about that was quirky and different that I really enjoyed. But I like parts of many of the other ones. Like, the Ghost Monument didn't really have the strongest plot, but at the end, when the TARDIS rematerializes, it was just like a moment for me where I was like, oh, Doctor and the TARDIS reunited was kind of, made me also feel something. So yeah, but otherwise I would think that's good. I think the weakest episode of the season for me personally was Arachnids in the UK. So
second that one.
Yeah.
I also really like, Raj, in Demons of the Punjab, that the aliens, like, they were a race of assassins, so the Doctor assumes that they're there to assassinate somebody, and then you find out later that they're like the last of their kind, and so they're like acting as witnesses to people who die alone. So I was like, there was like the whole season theme, I think, of like hope and redemption, right? So it's like they were this like warrior, violent race, or, you know, race of assassins. They were murderers, and now they're witnesses to people who die alone, which is like, you know, you sense like that race of aliens had their own arc. And so I really like that, and I thought that was a nice touch, and I think that the show has always been really good about that, about making you think one thing about somebody, about an alien, like, oh, they're violent, they're murderous, they're this, and then you realize that your first impression was completely wrong, and that, you know, it forces you to think about how you, you know, your own first impressions of things and how you rush to judgment on things. And I really like that. I thought that's one of the strong points of the show.
Yeah, I think one of the strong suits in general of this series is that they're really good at making us understand that, you know, the humans are often the bad guys. And, you know, they did that in Demons of the Punjab, and in Rosa, and, you know, even in Kerblam, which is sort of like an indictment of the, you know, of the Amazon work environment. But, you know, I think that in previous you know, incarnations of Doctor Who, there have been ways where they have certainly dealt with that in the same way, and I've always appreciated it, but it's been a little bit more of a sort of, ooh, big government is scary, or always wants to go to war, or whatever. And, you know, there's a lot of episodes with the Prime Minister. So it's more interesting to see, you know, just normal, regular humans and human culture, you know, in all of the ways that we have been evil in the past together, collectively, just normal neighbors. And I really like that, because it makes it much better to not have these just always the alien is the bad guy. And so Doctor Who in general has been, you know, good with that, but I think this season even more so.
Well, let me ask you about that, Sarah, because one of the criticisms I kept seeing on YouTube and so on was that the show had become too, quote unquote, preachy.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is this like more preachy than previous seasons, do you think?
Well, I only in the sense that it's being preachy about different things, right? Like, you know, and I think that the different things comes with, now that we have a female doctor, she is experiencing things like sexism in the Witchfinders. You know, she's experiencing being treated like a woman, you know, which is they have to remark on that, right? But, you know, I think in general, people have forgotten when they get upset about social justice in television and cinema, that most of fiction is about the good guys defeating the bad guys. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. And that's exactly what social justice is about. So it works really well in fiction to deal with sort of the battles for good and evil in the modern day. And the thing about social justice is that, you know, these are not really new fights. They're just new for certain people who haven't been paying attention before. Right? Like, you know, even you go to, when you look at the Rosa episodes, there should be nothing controversial about talking about the politics of 1955 Alabama. This is definitely something we should have progressed past at this point. And obviously with you know, we have been dealing with a resurgence of public white supremacy, in our own politics. But yeah, I think that the people who are crying social justice haven't really thought about it. And, you know, honestly, I don't think they really know what they're talking about.
Let me say about the Rose episode. I mean, I agree it was one of the strongest episodes of the season, and it really affected me emotionally. Just like seeing that sort of system dramatized. It almost feels like a Twilight Zone episode or something, like some, like, crazy science fiction universe.
Yeah.
And then and then you think like, wait, this was real life not that long ago, and it's you have like the different marked sections on the bus and stuff. It just feels so like weird. I did think with both that and Demons of the Punjab, which I also thought was one of the strongest episodes of the season, that I agree that the villains were too like mustache twirling or like not developed or there wasn't enough. I thought both episodes could have used more moral ambiguity somehow. And both of them, and I had this issue with some of the other episodes too, although I can't remember which ones now, but like the very last note was like the very last shot or scene or whatever was like super, super saccharine. I always like it better when stories end on a little bit more of a ambiguous note or like mixed emotions kind of note.
Yeah. If I might comment on your previous question, David, I think the difference between this season and previous seasons is that they would have dramatized similar situations by having it be like two different religions of aliens on a planet, or it would have been, some kind of different kind of segregation with non-humans or whatever. And this season actually is going back to, like you said, history, like the actual segregation that occurred in the United States and the Muslim Hindu conflict in India at the time. And so I think it's always been there. It's just like they're actually putting it in real life context. And, I think the message was always there. I mean, I think it's a lot stronger when you put it in terms of actually showing, racism in the South and the US. I mean, like, I think that's a much stronger message, but yeah. And also the other thing I would say is that the show is way more inclusive than it ever has been in the past. And I know people get bent out of shape about that, but that's a good thing because it means it's accessible to more people. And it also means that if it's accessible to more people, I think as Hollywood is starting to see, that means they can make more money, they can get more viewers. And so I think it's a win-win situation for everyone involved. And the people who get bent out of shape about it can bite me pretty much. So,
yeah.
Let me ask you though, Raj, because there have been something like 800 episodes of Doctor Who and they travel through time. And have they never interacted with like figures like Rosa Parks? I mean, that seems like weird.
Let me tell you this. So Demons of the Punjab for me especially stood out strongly because I've since gone back and started rewatching old Doctor Who from the first Doctor through. I'm still on Tom Baker again. But there is a series called The Talons of Wang Qiang, which deals with Asian characters, and they use yellowface. Like, they don't even have an actual Asian person as the villain. He's a white man in makeup to make him look Asian with a fake Asian voice. And it's not it's kind of like one of those Yellow Peril type things. And so the show has a history of like doing stuff like that, which I don't know it was necessary even back then. Especially since they have had Asian characters and Asian actors in the show before. I'm trying to think back to a lot of the history tends to be British history, I guess. Just thinking on the top of my head, I don't really recall them going to a lot of non-European or Western historical moments. I mean, I suppose it's possible that I just don't know about them, or I haven't seen them, or I'm forgetting them. But that doesn't seem to be a thing that I associate with Doctor Who up until now. I don't know, Matt, can you think of anything?
I feel like they go into a lot of British history because I think, the majority of their viewers are English and they're going to be familiar with those aspects. But, occasionally they will have episodes that take place in the U.S. And I always find it interesting to, number one, that like I think a lot of times they cast English actors doing American accents, especially when like an English actor does a New York accent, it's almost always wrong. I think the show, I think the show is strongest when it's tackling, contemporary issues. And I think that, Moffat kind of did that in a way, like he was very aware of like how, our addiction to technology might be not always a good thing. So I think he was focusing more on that than maybe like these social, political issues. But it's, like Raj said, like people have problems with this stuff. They can bite me. They can bite us all. Like who, like, you know what? You don't want to watch the show? Fine. Go watch something else. Like we'll continue to watch. Like to me, this, like Rosa and the Demons of Punjab, these were like really powerful episodes that dealt with real things that happened, and in some ways continue to happen. I think that, Dave, you were talking about this idea of like moral ambiguity in those episodes. And I think like you got to really be careful with that, because like what's the moral ambiguity about the villain in Krasco? Like he pretty much wants to stop the civil rights movement dead in its tracks. So it's like you can't really make his argument sound convincing. Like I thought they actually missed an opportunity to make his argument really like make it sound really dumb and stupid, and why would anyone believe that? But they just sort of made him just sort of cardboard, mustache twirly, and then he vanished, and I don't know, we might see him again, we may not. But yeah, I mean, I think the show really works when it tackles those contemporary issues, because like these are issues that that's on everyone's mind, right? We're thinking about these maybe consciously, maybe not consciously, and then when we see it like handled deftly in a show, and they talk about the issues and they explain them, and in a way like, like you said, Dave, it made you feel uncomfortable when you saw how people at that time had to sit on a different part of the bus. And it's like, it's something that you perhaps read about. Maybe you never really understood it that well until you saw it, played out on the screen, and empathized with those characters and saw them as human beings and not as just, a figure in a history book. And I think that's the strength of something like that, especially when you have a time machine. You can go back and experience all these events.
I mean, it was funny because one of the, I watched a video, I didn't have time to watch too many, but I tried to watch some of the criticisms of the show. I didn't find a lot of it super convincing, but one of the things I thought was funny was one person said like, oh, they've turned Doctor Who into like a children's show that just teaches history lessons, which, as I understand it, was actually the original premise of Doctor Who. So I thought it was just kind of funny that the idea that they've changed it into what was actually the initial premise of the show to begin with.
Yeah, it's also funny when somebody when somebody online says, "Well, there's too many companions, and we just need to go back to having one companion." And it's like, you clearly haven't seen the other seasons where there are multiple companions, and this is perfectly normal for Doctor Who.
Yeah, and there's 3 historical episodes out of 10. I mean, that's 30%, like quite literally. That's not a majority. That's not every episode. And the ones that they did choose, I thought all had, very good reasons for it. But for me, again, the show has always been about, on some level, about hope, and about like, it shows you kind of the spectrum of human behavior, that humans can be capable of such terrible things, but that humans are capable of such amazing things, compassion and courage, and, working together to accomplish great things. And the Doctor, for me, has always been somebody who's trying to push people or help people get to that great place, where humanity shines and believes in us humans, and believes that we can get there, and always wants to give people a chance. And to me, that this season checks all those boxes. I mean, it does that really well. And in some ways better than previous seasons, or, recent seasons, I should say. And to me, that is straight on right in the center of what Doctor Who is all about.
Yeah.
Well, so I mentioned that there's this big, difference on Rotten Tomatoes between the critic score and the audience score. And, the audience score, I think, is 23%, which seems pretty ridiculously low to me. I think that's just obviously people with strong opinions, overrepresented in that sample there. But then the critic score of 94% seems kind of high to me. I would rate this more like on the 75% out of 100, like 7 out of 10 score for the season. Raj, you mentioned you didn't particularly care for arachnids in the UK. I also thought the Witchfinders was pretty weak, and I thought the Battle of Ranskoor of Kolos and Ghost Monument, I have those marked as just sort of so-so. I wouldn't say they were that great.
I agree with the first two you definitely mentioned. I mean, arachnids of the UK, the thing that bugs me the most about it is they build up this huge thing. You know, we see that giant spider, and then boom, gets shot at the end of the episode, and it was like, that's it. Like, I felt really let down by how that
Yeah, there were more
happened.
spiders in the city, weren't there?
Right.
Yeah.
And then also, again, the villain, to me, was terrible. I think that's what I would like to see them develop the villains more. I mean, I liked Tim Shaw. I liked, I guess the best villain, I'm trying to think of what other villains were there, but yeah, I agree with you also on the Witchfinders. Like, I wanted to like that a bit more, but also King James bugged the hell out of me. Although,
really?
After
loved it.
I thought he was great. I want to see more of him.
I just felt like it against the backdrop of these people being killed, it was a little too, it didn't work tonally for me. But the interesting thing was, after I saw that episode, I saw the Mary Queen of Scots movie, and I was like, oh, right, like that this King James is Mary Queen of Scots' son. And so when he talks about his parents in that episode, it makes more sense when you see it dramatized as well. But yeah.
I mean, I agree that the Alan Cumming was very, very entertaining in that role. But I agree with Raj from a historical perspective. The idea that people would talk to the King of England this way and like not be executed on the spot just did not seem like real life to me.
But I loved how eccentric he was, that he would just anything people would say, he would just like, oh, it's, whatever, let's go kill the witches. Like, he's like this eccentric, kind of smart, kind of stupid. Like, there's like weird blind spots that he has. Like, I don't know. I just enjoyed his character very much.
By the way, just like one thing I noticed, and they've been doing this for a while, but the companions and the Doctor just go to any time period with their clothes as they are. And back in the like Tom Baker days, they used to have to like put on Victorian dress to actually go out into Victorian England. So I wonder when that changed. And, I guess it makes more sense for us, the audience, but I kind of miss when they had to dress up in
well, you would think the TARDIS probably has a heck of a walk-in closet on it.
Yeah, we've seen it, I think, a couple times, yeah.
Sarah, were you going to say something?
Oh, just I enjoyed Witchfinders, I think, more than the rest of you, just because, I mean, the history of women trying to help and using herbs and healing, and labeling them as witches is very interesting. And I like the way that they handled that. But I feel like, you said that it wasn't believable to have, King James walking around like that and having everybody sort of interacting with him casually. But that's very Doctor Who to me. That's very classic, like having a very overblown sense of reality bordering on satire where it's not meant to be taken seriously. It's meant to be this sort of, hilarious romp, and almost a dreamlike idea of history rather than actual history. Because if they were dealing with actual history, I don't think they'd be able to, do as many stories as they do. They would have to go back and really alter the stories because there's so many things. I mean, the Doctor is showing her ankles and wearing pants, and nobody seems to remark on it that much. They remark on it from time to time, but it would actually be a huge deal. So, I feel like that part is intentional.
But it's like you contrast, Alan Cumming playing King James with, I don't know the actress's name who played Rosa Parks, where she was just like dead on realistic to me. I mean,
they couldn't have done something both that recent and that rife with political tension and importance culturally. We don't have people around who, were around when King James was around. So we can make allowances and take, risks and stuff with characters that nobody actually remembers, that we can't do with modern events.
I guess just for me, having only seen Rosa and Demons of the Punjab, when you get to the Witchfinders, it's kind of like, wait, what? Because the other ones are, have a much more grounded reality to them.
I think that's common for Doctor Who, is to sort of, vary in tone like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sarah, what did you think? Would you rate this season 94%, or would you rate it differently than that?
I would rate it 94%. And I really am upset that Rotten Tomatoes has not fixed this issue yet, because this has been ongoing since at least the all-female Ghostbusters reboot. It's been going on for several years, where, first of all, audience ratings should not even be collected until the thing comes out, whatever it is. Like, I don't understand why they haven't made very simple changes that would prevent these kinds of campaigns from going on. And that's what they are. These are not honest opinions of people. These are there have been stories about how far-right groups have little underground conversations between themselves where they literally create fake accounts that, sign up for these things and go ahead and rate things low before they have even come out. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand why Rotten Tomatoes has not taken a serious look at this and taken some very basic steps to prevent it.
Like, what would they, like, say they made it so you couldn't review stuff until it was out, you would still have the same issue, right? Maybe it would just happen a little bit slower, but, like, is there anything they could do to just prevent people who are highly motivated to give something negative reviews from doing that?
Well, it's right now it almost feels like they've done nothing. So even if they did a couple of basic common sense things, it would be a little better, because when that audience rating starts out as low, when that movie comes out or whatever it is, that matters.
Yeah.
So yeah, they would sort of, I'm sure that they would totally tweak their strategy to modify to whatever changes were made, but at least they should be trying. They should, make sure that you can only have, like Facebook, make sure you can only have one account. People go around it all the time and have fake accounts under different email addresses, but at least they try. And I feel like Rotten Tomatoes has not even begun to address the issue.
Matt, would you give this season 94% or something different?
I would give it, 9 out of 10. I'd probably give it a 90. I think that I really loved it. I was really excited about it. I thought that there were, like, we said, there were a few episodes that didn't quite work for me. I wanted to know a little bit more about the Doctor, not in every single detail of her backstory, but I guess I wanted more interaction with the companions and the Doctor, and I thought maybe she used her sonic screwdriver a little too much. But overall, I thought it was really great, and it was really refreshing, and I think a 90, 94, I could give it a 94. I just, like, as long as they make another season with this Doctor, I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's like you would watch, like, I'm dating myself, but the Siskel and Ebert, right? And they would give it thumbs up and thumbs down. And, like, I was like, well, I disagree with that. So, like, if I went on Rotten Tomatoes and, someone gave it a bad review, I'm like, well, all right. I could see how, like, as Sarah said, like, if it gets 20% on Rotten Tomatoes and I'm going to go see a movie and I see it's 20%, I'm like, oh, maybe I don't want to see that. So I do think it could affect, sales and things like that, and ratings from like viewership. But no, I want to see more of it. Whatever rating that takes to see more of Doctor Who, that's what I want.
Well, I feel like if the critic rating is 94% and the audience rating is 25%, whatever, like, I'm definitely not taking the audience rating at face value.
And I think, like, who's ever at the BBC, like, approving the the budget for the shows and things like that, I think they're looking more at viewership ratings and advertising revenue than Rotten Tomatoes. But yeah.
Well, right, and also, the Rotten Tomatoes, even if you were to assume that all of those ratings, the audience ratings, were sort of well intentioned. What's the word? Good faith. That's 5,000 people out of 6.5 million who watched, I think, a typical episode.
Right.
There's also been a lot of these YouTube videos. They're like, oh, the ratings are tanking. Like, at least as far as I can tell, the ratings have declined throughout the season, which I think is pretty normal. But they're still above the ratings for the last season or two. So, I don't think it's the case that the ratings have, like, totally tanked. The show's, like, in a tailspin.
Do you know if this season had higher viewership than previous seasons, or what was it?
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so it started out at almost 11 million for the premiere, and I think it dropped to around 6.5 million by the end.
And how did that compare to earlier seasons?
Yeah, from what I remember, the last season with Peter Capaldi, it started out at like 8.5 million and dropped to 5.5 million. So this was consistently above that all season.
Oh wow, good.
Yeah, and I am so tired of within science fiction, like even within any genre, right? Like hearing people complain about diversity, about intentional diversity in a show is annoying because it's like you can immediately tell how these people grew up. And I grew up in in an intentional community, Columbia, Maryland, which was a very clear response to the white flight. And they, Rouse, who was like the grandfather of Edward Norton, by the way, was the developer. And he decided that he was going to intentionally mix the communities and welcome families who, of color. And so as a result, I literally grew up in an environment where, a third of my class was black, a third of my class was, Asian, Indian, and white. And so my friends were not only of color, but I would go over to their houses and their parents clearly had more money than we did. And this had an extraordinary effect on my being raised that way and sort of this culture of normalcy. And so especially when you see, and I read an article recently that said, in London, there are more Indian restaurants than any other kind of restaurant because London has changed. The demographics of London has changed over the past couple of decades. And so it's really frustrating to hear this complaint constantly where it's like, okay, this isn't just what life will be like. This is what life has been like for many of us. And I am so tired of it. It's so gross, but it's extra sickening in science fiction because this is the goal of science fiction. This is what happens in science fiction, this mixing of cultures.
Yep. See, Raj, what would you give the show 90% or 94%?
I mean, I guess it would depend on context. I mean, to be honest, I love Doctor Who to death, but I don't know that I would give any one season, that higher rating if we're comparing it against any other season of television anywhere else. Because I find that those seasons can be very uneven for me. For example, I would give Blink the episode like a 98 or a 99 or something like that. But I think over the course of a season, however, compared to other Doctor Who seasons, I would definitely rank this, up there. I mean, I think they still need to work on some things. I'd like to see a little bit stronger, like I said, villains, a little bit stronger plotting. Sometimes the end just kind of seems to, happen very quickly. And I think that's because they're more focused on the character interactions, the character arcs and things like that. But, this is their first season with a new showrunner, a new writing staff, a whole new team. So I think it's like one of those, they're finding their footing. So I can't wait to see what they're going to do with the next season, which I heard won't be back until 2020.
2020, right? Isn't that insane?
What did you think, Sarah, about the Chris Noth character, who I agree with? I think it was Raj said it was not well written at all, and seemed to that did seem to me to have some like weird political commentary shoehorned into it.
Which episode was that?
The evil hotel owner in the Arachnids in the UK. He was the Mr. Big in Sex and the City.
Oh right, yeah. No, I mean he was very sort of cartoonish. And, I think that he was sort of, in a way, the villain that reminded me the most of previous villains that I had seen in the Moffat era, because, this idea of sort of rich and powerful, very cartoonishly bad, not that, unfortunately, we've learned in the modern era that rich and powerful, cartoonishly evil villains do exist and are allowed to be in place. But yeah, he was just kind of almost a throwaway character to me. But, it served the purpose of the plot. I also wasn't a huge fan of that episode, in part because I have some mild arachnophobia, and I was like, I don't want to watch this, but I did. I got through it. So yeah, and also I totally agree that often, the conflicts are wrapped up too quickly. I think that would be my number one criticism of, conflicts almost seeming to resolve themselves. And they just don't, because of that, they seem almost like they were never threatening to begin with. So they do all this work of making you feel like this is a real problem and how are we going to resolve this? And then they resolve it kind of instantly.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I guess we haven't actually talked about Resolution, which is the New Year's Day special, where you have the return of the Daleks. I actually thought this was pretty cool. I would say this is one of my favorite episodes because it was darker and, the danger felt a lot more real in this episode. Yeah. But like you were just saying, I thought that it wrapped up pretty easily. I guess they only had an hour to work with. I thought maybe it should have gone longer. But I don't know what you guys. Well, how about Matt? What do you think of the New Year's Day special?
I liked it. I thought that I agree with you. Like it sort of began more like a horror movie or a horror short story. Like they awakened this underground evil that had been buried for 1,000 years. I thought that was really cool. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first time we see a villain from previous seasons. So it's the first time that we didn't see any Cybermen. We didn't see any. This is the first time we see the Daleks. The Daleks. I think the episode sort of relies on a little too much of our previous awareness of Daleks, because I it's definitely creepy that the Dalek takes control of the archaeologist and then Ryan's dad. But the idea that the Dalek would one day, has enough power to take over the whole planet. And that to me was well, I don't know if they really established that. The doctor said that, but it's it just has one little laser. Is it that tough? But yeah.
Well, no, but it was gonna call the fleet, right?
Right. It was gonna call the fleet. But no, I mean, I like the episode. I think that the resolution of it, like we said before, resolution, haha. The resolution of Resolution, it was a bit too easy. It was basically Ryan forgives his dad, and then dad gets the strength to, shake off the evil Dalek and drop it into the supernova, and then it's happily ever after. And I thought it might have been an opportunity for the dad to realize, say to him, I'm sorry for what I did to you, and then let go, and then. But I think the show had been trying to keep this lighter tone throughout, and then he had already lost his grandmother, and then to lose a dad as well, I think might have been too much, and maybe they didn't want to do that. But
I mean, my issue with the ending being too easy was less with that part than with the blowing up the Dalek tank thing with microwave parts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of silly, and then he's dragging around the microwave the whole time before that, and it's oh, okay, there you go, there's the MacGuffin. But I love the Daleks. I'm always excited to see them, and they're always creepy and cool, and I thought that the I know you said earlier the CGI for the arachnids in the UK was bad, but I thought the CGI for the Dalek in this was really well done and really creepy, because I mean I think we've only seen the Dalek out of its case a handful of times, and usually I seem to remember them being small, maybe a size of a large plate or something. But this one was taking up a whole wall. I was oh, that's creepy and cool.
About Raj, what did you think of Resolution?
I liked it. I had some issues with it as well, but I thought it was cool to see a new kind. I mean, if you're going to bring back the Daleks, to come up with a new kind, the reconnaissance scout that we hadn't experienced before. Which, I'm willing to buy, that they have these lone creatures that are more powerful, that they shoot off into, distant places. I really, I guess I think of myself as a romantic at heart. And I thought that little budding romance that they start out with was really great, because immediately there are stakes now for that character who gets possessed, that I was oh no, they're not going to ever get together.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really smart way to do that. And, I do love the Daleks were, one of the first things I saw in Doctor Who that I was like, oh my God, they're so weird and cool. I also really love the fact that the Dalek constructing its body through its host kind of mirrored the scene in the first episode where the Doctor is in that kind of like smithy or like that mechanic shop, kind of constructing her own identity. I thought that was a really cool throwback. And I love the fact that, I think the resolution between Ryan and his dad at the end was a little easy, but the fact that we had a whole season to kind of build up Ryan's situation, Graham's situation, and how, to see, like, I really enjoyed the parts where Graham, like, takes Ryan's dad aside and is like, I gotta talk straight to you. And that, obviously, this showrunner and this writing team, their primary focus is on the characters and their relationships. And I think that's why some of the plots resolve so easily, because they're not as concerned with that. They're focusing more on making the characters work. But I think it has been working. I think it's one of the strongest parts of the season. I also really loved that they, the Doctor tries to call UNIT, which is an organization that's been in the show from the second season, I think, or the second Doctor's time frame. And they're like, budget cuts, there's no longer a unit anymore, which,
that was a hilarious scene.
Yeah, it was really well done.
Well, what you were saying, Raj, about the two characters at the beginning kind of confessing their feelings to each other, like my girlfriend at that part was like, "Aww." Right. So totally got her.
That's also what I was pretty much doing. But I felt like it was, it wasn't like a throwaway thing. I felt like they really sold that moment. Like it's that budding romance thing. Two people who finally admit something and like, oh, let's go out later. And then she gets possessed by a doll. I guess sometimes happens, I guess. So.
But that actually reminds me, Raj, you said on Facebook that your girlfriend has not liked Doctor Who in the past, but really liked this season.
Well, so I would say, I don't know that she's watched it any significant, portion of time, but I know she bounced off of it previously. She tried to get into it. She just bounced off of it. And this season, I was like, I'm going to watch Doctor Who. It's the new female Doctor. Would you like to, watch it with me? And she said, sure, I'll give it a shot. And she watched the whole season with me and was really into it. And I think there's a few specific things. One is, I think the humor really won her over because it's a really sharp, but subtle humor. It's not like they turned it into a slapstick comedy or anything, but the Banksy thing, there's lots of little throwaways like that. I think it's the enthusiasm of the Doctor, which is really Doctor, again, is just so excited by things, like experiencing things and seeing things. And that comes across, which I think infects the viewer a bit. And I will say this, the one thing I hadn't mentioned so far, I think the cinematography on this season has been better than anything the show has almost ever done, because there's something in the way they're shooting it, the colors, the quality of the picture that has elevated it for me, and that it doesn't look as cheesy as some previous seasons do. And I accept the cheesy and I welcome the cheesy because that's always been part of Doctor Who, but somehow it just seems sharper and crisper and more professional. And I think that that's really great.
Yeah, they did say they changed those elements. They changed the way that they filmed it.
I think some of the CGI is shaky still, but I love the end part with the universe, the sentient universe as the frog, but that frog looked terrible. I couldn't. I just wished it. I wished it had been Grace in the end, because that way, I wouldn't have been distracted by this weird looking frog. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say, what do you guys think about the fact that every episode was its own story? And do you think there should have been more of an arc or more two-part episodes or something like that?
I enjoyed it. I read that somewhere that they were trying to they did that intentionally so that you don't have to have this incredible knowledge or lore of Doctor Who to get into it. You can jump in at any episode and you don't need to know what was going on 6 episodes before. Sometimes those season-long arcs can be fun, and I think that especially when you don't realize it's happening, and then you realize 6 or 7 episodes later, oh, that thing that they were doing all the way back there is somehow coming into play now. I think having a story like that can really work. But I enjoyed this. It just made me feel like every episode I was going into, I'm like not completely starting over, but there's like a freshness to it. There's no, I guess, quote unquote baggage from previous episodes. It's just like, okay, we're in a new place, new time. We know these characters. What's the story? To me, that works. But I wouldn't necessarily be against seeing a plot arc in future seasons. I think that Moffat and even Tennant to a degree was not Tennant. Davies was like guilty of a lot of times like making the companions, like turning them into like they had these like epic plots that somehow they were all connected to this cosmic thing. And I like that the companions in this are just ordinary people, at least so far it seems that way. And I think that grounds the show because they are basically stand-ins for us. Like we put ourselves in their shoes and like, we're experiencing these things for the first time just like they are. Yeah. So that part I think works really well.
Yeah, I would just like to say that, I think I like the one-offs, and after Moffat, he had these convoluted, sometimes seasons long, like several seasons long arcs that were going on that I forgot what the beginning deal was in the first place. So that I got tired of that for a while. And so these kind of like short, punchy episodes, I think, or, individual episodes worked for me. But also the fact that we do get arcs for the characters, like the Doctor becomes more confident as the season goes on. The group gels more, Ryan and Graham come together at the end, or at least voice their appreciation, or Ryan voices his acceptance and appreciation of his grandfather. And, we do get the kind of Tim Shaw in the first episode, and then at the last episode of the season, it's kind of closing that loop and dealing with Grace's death sort of in the long term. So I think they gave us enough that made it feel like there was progression while keeping each episode kind of different, which I appreciated.
All right, cool. So we're pretty much out of time. So I think we're going to have to go into some final thoughts if anyone has any. I guess I'll just remind people that this Jodie Whittaker is coming back as the Doctor for at least one more season in 2020. I don't know if there's any more information that we know about that at the moment, but how about Sarah, final thought?
I'm just really happy with it. I think that before this series, I didn't particularly think of myself as a quote-unquote Doctor Who fan. I liked it, and I would watch it or not, like depending on who the Doctor was, and I could kind of come and go with it. And the episodic nature of it means that you can kind of pick up and go and pick it up again and 3 years later when they have some other Doctor. It's sort of always around, and so you just sort of it's almost like it's easy to take advantage of it because of that. But I don't have the same love of it that I do of something like Star Trek, for instance, until this season. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is something extremely compelling about who the Doctor is, who the Doctor has always been, and making him female. And to me, that was always, I think, something that stood in the way of my enjoyment of Doctor Who. There was just something almost too male about the whole thing between with the female companions and everything. But I really love it, and I really enjoyed watching episodes more than once, which isn't always something that I particularly enjoyed with traditional Doctor Who, other than really good episodes, which totally exist. But yeah, I'm just super excited about waiting a year and seeing what they do with it in the next season.
Cool. And how about Raj? Final thought?
One, I love Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor. I think she just brings this energy and wide-eyed wonder to the role that really works for being the Doctor, but also kind of in contrast to what had come before. It just it made me fall in love with the character all over again, which I love. And I'm really excited to see the show come back because I think, this season was them finding their footing. And I think that they'll be able to, improve in the next series. And I also think that, this has been airing live recently. So like when it hits DVD or when it hits whatever streaming services it might come to, I wonder if it'll get even wider, even bigger of an audience. And I hope so. And I feel like people who get into Doctor Who can sometimes become like lifelong fans. So, I think that it could have even more of an effect than it does in just the Rotten Tomatoes ratings or the TV ratings. So.
Cool. And Matt, final thought.
I love the season. I love Jodie Whittaker. As we discussed, there are parts of it that aren't perfect, but like as Rajan said, they're getting their feet. I think one of the things that stuck out for me was just the overall sense of hope and optimism of this season. I think that, I loved Peter Capaldi as the Doctor, but I also felt like he had a certain like acerbic quality to his character. He's very sarcastic and kind of bitter. It took a while for him to grow on me, because I felt like he wasn't really how I always felt the Doctor was. And so like when Jodie Whittaker comes along and is just like, just in awe at the universe and just always optimistic and hopeful, and also like, leads with her brain, not with a gun. And like, I love all of that. And I think that she just nailed it. So I'm super excited, and I'm kind of sad that I have to wait a whole year to see more.
All right, well, I think that's a good note to end on. So we'll wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Raj Don Khanna, Sara Lynn Michener, and Matthew Kressel. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Raj Don Khanna, Sara Lynn Michener, and Matthew Kressel for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Why Not Make the Crib Great, who writes, "If you like sci-fi, you should listen to this podcast. This podcast introduces me to things I hadn't heard of before that I go on to love, while also embiggening my understanding of books, movies, shows, and ideas which I thought I'd had down pat. A perfectly cromulent show. So big thanks again to Why Not Make the Crib Great for that great review. Special thanks as well to Whitney Treppel, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. I also want to thank Angus McCallan for sponsoring today's show. Learn more about his new Asian-inspired epic fantasy novel, Gates of Stone, over at gatesofstonebook.com. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.